Jennifer Brown Consulting, JBC, Jennifer has established a 20-year-old certified woman and LGBTQ-owned firm. And then we have Giselle Phelps, the founder and CEO of Grand Rising Talent, a Los Angeles-based licensed talent agency and media strategy firm. And she connects diverse television talent with really amazing opportunities in media. So she's got some great things happening she's going to tell you about a little later on as well. So Giselle currently serves on the board of directors for Outfest as communications chair and advisory council for Forbes BLK, which I believe is like the Black Voices segment of Forbes, the media publication. So together, Jennifer and Giselle bring a wealth of knowledge and experience to this conversation about the importance of leadership and representation in the LGBTQ community. Now, this is a conversation, remember, and we want to remind everyone that you have questions you might want to ask as well. So please leave them in the comment sections or even comments, and we'll try to answer and get to as many of those as we can over the next hour. So without further ado, everyone, please join me as we welcome Jennifer Brown and Giselle Phelps. Hello to you both. Welcome.
Hello.
Thank you, Corey.
Yeah, thanks, Corey.
Oh, you're very, very welcome. Great to see you both. And you know, it's just really appropriate that I want to just jump in really quickly because we're talking about like LGBT leaderships and people who have been allies. And so I just want to give a shout out to Madonna, because today we heard some bad news that Madonna was found unconscious and unresponsive, which was kind of scary because she's one of our biggest LGBT, I guess, allies of the past 2 centuries, if you really think about it. So apparently she's doing better. She's doing okay, but got to shout out Madonna. So get well soon, right?
Yes,
absolutely. Okay, so back to the reason why we're here. You know, it's going to be a pretty robust topic. So let's just jump right in. And I will actually begin asking a few questions. Primarily, Giselle, I would like to know your opinion on something that's more of a recent sort of occurrence and headline. So what is your response to all the recent orchestrated bans on drag shows and drag queen story hour and seemingly attempts to suppress the LGBTQ civil liberties and all the progress that's been made? Do you have an opinion on that?
I do have an opinion on that. You know, it's a great question. It's something that we're seeing in headlines weekly, right? There's legislation popping up in states across the country, you know, especially in southern states. And in my opinion, you know, this is misdirected hate. It is a dog whistle that's being used for political gain in a very toxic political climate that we currently live in. And, you know, it's something that has to be really strategically counter-programmed, right, at the grassroots level. And so, for example, at Outfest, we had our QT BIPOC Fusion Film Festival in April of this year, and we held a drag story hour for families. And, you know, that was very intentional programming, right? To show people just how really this impacts families across the country, and to really normalize those interactions as well, that these are the people who perform drag are tax-paying citizens like everybody else, right? And people have all sorts of pastimes in this country. And, you know, queer people are an easy target for political gain. And so that's what's happening here. And it, you know, unfortunately, it's par for the course when it comes to political rhetoric in our country right now. I mean, we've all seen what has transpired over the last decade. And so, yeah, but I do think there are a lot of people on the ground across the country, coast to coast, who are, you know, really strategically counter-programming that narrative. You know, it's really similar to, you know, the book bans that we're seeing across the country.
Yeah. And it's interesting you bring up the idea about kind of countering those sort of efforts that are being made. So when it comes to what Jennifer does, working with corporations, it's almost like the opposite end of that, where she is actually going into organizations and being like, no, we're a normal community. Like we're the same as you. We put our pants on one leg at a time. You know, we're diverse as everyone else. So Jennifer, when it comes to that kind of, I guess, if you will, movement in some parts of the country, how does that impact what you do when you go into corporations and organizations and your whole purpose is to unify and normalize the LGBTQ community for organizations?
Oh, that's right. I mean, yeah, thanks for having me. We spend so much of our lives, in our professional capacities. And it's interesting to think about, even just hybrid or remotely, the culture of our workplace has so much to do with our own journeys of belonging and becoming and coming out as all the things that we are. And sometimes the workplace is the place that encourages people to actually do that work. Ironically, some of the employers have made it a priority over the many, many years I've been consulting in it, to be a welcoming environment and to be very overt about that. So around the world, especially, this is true. If you have the privilege of working for some of the companies that I get to support, there is a more open conversation going on there than there is in the society, in their communities, right around the world. I mean, legal, not legal. It's down to that question. And that's always been true. So you get this sense when you're inside these walls of these companies that there's protection, there's commitment. And I know right now it feels shaky. We're reading a lot of headlines around support being kind of rescinded and not being as strong as we would have thought it was. And we thought it was. And I think that's destabilizing for a lot of us because the Edelman Trust Index points out that private institutions and companies are much more trusted than our own government at this point. People sort of look to companies, rightly or wrongly, as somewhat of these arbiters of social change and advocacy. And that's kind of what we've gotten used to. And then it's just very unsettling what's happening to watch how these companies are responding to the pushback, which has never been so targeted and strong. I will say that. So they're having to kind of choose and straddle this line or thread the needle or whichever metaphor you want to use. And it's a very uncomfortable place, but it's making a lot of us, I think, really uncomfortable because it's, we think that demographics are on our side. We know that society is changing. We know that smart companies need to change with it. We know they know that. And so seeing the caving behavior, when it's not convenient or when it becomes more difficult or challenging and not standing by the community is really troublesome. So I know what I'm saying when I go in. I say, look, which side do you want to be on? Like, what kind of future do you envision? And do you want to thrive? And do you want to attract and retain great people? Do you want to cater to customers that are changing and really understand their world? Because there is no business without understanding who your constituents are. And so all those like business case things are still in place. But certainly they're being rattled. They're being tested.
Yeah. And I think, not to call out any brands, but I would just mention things that have been in the headlines. So I'm not really calling them out. I mean, two of the biggest examples would be the Bud Light situation, obviously, and then Target, I believe, is the other, those two. And, and Target, and what's crazy about both of those, I want to make sure the public understands that both of those corporations for years have been allies. There's been a rainbow on that Bud Light bottle every year that I've been in New York City during Pride. And I've seen that little, not so little, I've seen the LGBT Pride section in Target with the clothing and little kids' clothing with the rainbows. Well, little kids have, in many cases, two same-sex parents. And that rainbow for them symbolizes the two dads or two moms that they love. So this notion that somehow that's a negative or something that's derogatory, I think is a false narrative completely. So that's my take on it. But I also want to ask you too, though, I'll stick with you, Jennifer, on this one, because it does tie into this idea of people say, well, keep your personal life to yourself. I hear that. In fact, even with, the NSLS previous thread we had, there was a gentleman who I spoke with very constructively who said, well, that's your private life. And then Jennifer, to your point, well, no, if I come to work, that might impact my benefits. My same-sex partner may not be covered if my employer doesn't provide. I mean, so talk about that component of why it's important to actually have that inclusion in place for the avoidance of discrimination.
Right. And by the way, we can't innovate and be creative and trust each other and sort of, the things that grease the wheels of business and creation if we don't feel comfortable and we don't feel like we belong. I just think it's so, if anybody's ever tried to do that, it feels like you're kind of managing your psychological safety at the same time as you're trying to be productive. And it's really the uncertainty about whether you're supported is so, it's so distracting and destructive, I think. And ultimately, it causes a lot of retention issues for not just LGBTQ people, but everyone who hasn't felt welcomed in the workplace. And by the way, that's everyone that's not a probably cisgender white straight man historically. So I think that we have to see this for how important it is. And it is the benefits, but it's the culture as well. It's the day to day. It's what you hear. It's what you don't hear. It's what you see in leadership or who you don't see. It's the commitments that your company honors or doesn't. So we're always kind of taking this pulse of, am I supported here? Can I relax and feel a sense of belonging? And belonging is a really big word now. And I relate it. I mean, I'd love to hear, Giselle, your thoughts, but it's very popular, I think, amongst younger generations, as I've noticed it, because I remember the days when it was just D, diversity. And then we sort of added the I, and then the E has been added, and now we're in the B land, and it just keeps growing, which is awesome. I love that. I love language and words. I think they're very important and they signify something important, but belonging is a very popular way to talk about these concepts. And I'll tell you, the younger generation is demanding to feel it, to experience it, to witness it, to have the receipts. So I don't know, companies think they can kind of bargain with this, and I don't think they can. So they're playing a short game, but I think they're sort of losing the thread of what the future is really going to look like and how they need to earn and maintain the trust and relationships that have gotten us this far.
Yeah. Especially because Gen Z, as we know, that's specifically one of the most watched and one of the most sort of like scrutinized, but looked after and looked at generations really in a while, maybe since the 1960s. And they are demanding social consciousness from the brands. They demand it. And it's interesting, though, about that topic, Giselle, the idea of being able to show up as who you are. For many of us who are more visibly ethnic people who are also of the LGBTQ community, I had to kind of put that very, we walk into a room, we're sort of Black first, and then we're LGBT. We don't have a choice in how people perceive us first. So we live at like these sort of intersectionality of two things. And even for Jennifer, you too. I mean, you're dealing with things as a woman, which has its own area as discrimination, no matter what color you are. And then you add to that the LGBT component. So Giselle, talk a little bit about, building allyship across different identities and why that is important.
Yeah, I mean, again, a fantastic question. And I'm still kind of simmering on Jennifer's point there about the concept of belonging, right? And when I think about belonging, I think of community, right? And so is there a community for my identities within this organization? And so, Corey, I mean, you're spot on in the sense that for me, for example, I'm Black, I'm a woman, and I'm bisexual. And all of those intersections intersect for me daily. All of those identities intersect for me on a daily basis simultaneously. And when I show up in a space, typically my Blackness is going to show up first. So even before we get to, then probably the fact that I'm a woman, if I'm dressed, presenting femininely or whatever. Right. And then, possibly, my identity, depending on the space and the nature of the conversation, right? I actually just had a very interesting conversation yesterday with a media personality who interviewed one of my clients. And the person said to me that, they didn't know I was queer. And they said, oh, I would never know. And I thought, okay, well, implying that like I don't appear so.
Right. Yeah.
And so I'm like, well, we really need to move past that, because what does a queer person look like?
Right, right. And we know now that it's everything. I mean, it's the soccer mom, it's the construction worker, it's it's the lady at the grocery store. I mean, it's everyone. And I remember hearing all these really silly tropes when I was growing up, and I would come out to people and they'd be like, "Oh, I knew you were gay because you smiled and you showed all your teeth when you smiled." Like
Yeah,
stuff
right.
stuff like that, right? Or, "Oh, I knew you were gay because, you dressed really nice when you came to school." I'm like, "But people dress nice." Like, eh, so I
Right.
think that's a problem. People are sort of assigning all these weird things to what's gay. Like, no, you don't know anyone's gay until they tell you
Mm,
they are.
Exactly. You're
yeah.
not going to be able to know just by again, maybe if I'm wearing a t-shirt that says, I'm gay, I'm LGBTQ plus, like maybe, then you might be able to infer, oh, okay. But
Mhm.
so when you talk about allyship, right? And how people can it's changed, it's a lot of unprogramming. And we've all been conditioned along, these hetero norms, right? And I think especially and that's really what the younger generation is challenging
Mhm.
really fiercely, right? And so when you are in a workplace or a part of any community, you really have to challenge yourself to think beyond, heteronormative terms, beyond the binary even,
Right.
right? So in terms of somebody's overall identity. And I
Mhm.
think that and these are new conversations, like that's the
Yes.
reality.
Yeah,
These
yeah.
are new conversations, and they're conversations that have really become part of the mainstream in more substantial ways over the last 5 years or so, right?
Mhm.
And so
Yeah, yeah,
these are, for a lot of people, new ways of thinking.
yeah.
And I find that when you broker these conversations, folks are open to listening, but it's going to take time, right?
Mm,
Mhm.
For people to change, centuries of thinking around identity, sexual orientation, and gender identity,
Big
right?
ones. Yeah, really, really big ones,
mhm.
especially when it comes to you bring up a great point, which I think a lot of people who are hopefully watching now will have encountered at some point now is the pronoun situation.
Oh, yeah.
Yes.
And there's a thing where it's like, I say, well, how difficult is it just to address someone as the pronoun that they identify with? It's a lot easier to just
Right.
do that than to challenge them and protest it. But you're right, Giselle. These are new conversations, so I want to encourage everyone not to be fearful of the conversations, not to be
Mm,
dismissive of them, but to engage with them because you have a potential to learn why those pronouns are important and the difference between gender identity and your physical uh, body in which you were born in, which are one's psychological and one's physical. They're not the exact same thing. So there's so much to be discussed, and I think that is where we are sort of like missing. We're
yeah.
not connecting
Yeah.
those dots. I think.
And those of us within the community, or those of us who are strong allies who are already, established within the community, need to have a certain amount of grace for folks that are willing to listen and learn. Right?
Mhm.
There has to be some margin of error for folks. Like,
Right.
if,
Yeah.
and it's like, if you tell somebody their pronouns and they mess up and correct themselves, right? It's like you gotta give people some grace, as long as the effort is there and the intentions
Mhm.
are pure, right? So
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
um so I think that's part of it too, because I have these conversations with a lot of friends of varying identities, whether they're in the LGBTQ plus community or not. And folks want to have the conversations, but sometimes they're afraid.
Mhm.
Mhm. I see
Yeah.
a lot of that. I see a
And
lot
as
of
Yeah. And as
yeah.
Black people, that's, we're also, Corey, we're used to hearing that on the other side of things too, where folks are scared to talk to us about, you know, Black issues because,
Right.
they don't want to get something wrong.
Right, yeah, yeah, you're right. And so Jennifer, you mentioned that do you experience that like people sort of want to join the conversation and then they're almost afraid to step on a landmine if
Oh,
they just say the wrong thing?
like all day long. Every day, that's what I do. That's where I live. Because
Mhm,
I try to teach the bulk of my work is teaching people that look like me, ethnicity wise, because I'm
mhm,
white. Um, Teaching them to step in, the water's warm. Like the only way we're going to learn is through practice and effort, as you say,
Right.
Giselle, and hoping that when we ask people to leap into allyship, right, take that leap, that the net appears, and we can't pull the net out from under people and
Right.
say,
Yeah. Yeah.
oops, you didn't get it perfectly the first time. I mean, it
Mm-hmm.
is like Giselle says, it's such a long process, I think, and this is very new, particularly for the older generations. I'm in Gen X,
Yes.
and
Yes.
we were told to say and think, I don't see color, for example.
Right. Which is problematic, right? If you
Right,
really don't see
exactly.
color, right?
Right.
Exactly.
We know this now, but when I'm in a room, and unfortunately, senior executives, there's not a lot of color in that room. There's not a lot of knowledge in that room usually. So these
Mm-hmm.
things I say, like pro tip, let's revise the I don't see color. You can really see people paying attention. I mean, this is something they haven't gotten the intel on yet. And
Right. Right.
instead, I go into an exploration of intersectionality and difference and how important differences are and how differences make a difference, and they
Mm-hmm.
may not to the people who feel comfortable in a given system because the system was built by and for them. They're never going to know what that feels like.
Right.
They're not, right. It's the water you swim in and it's comfortable because it makes
Mm-hmm.
sense to you because it was built by you.
Yeah. Right. Yeah.
So,
You're right. Yeah.
Right.
right. So
Exactly.
I think, what I'm asking is to take your lenses off and to begin to really proactively lean into those conversations you've never had before. Put yourself into other communities of identity and listen and
Mm-hmm.
learn and practice your allyship, however imperfectly.
Yeah.
And I think, Giselle, I love what you said. We've got to welcome that effort. And I love like the concept of call in versus call out. I
Yeah.
think that calling in is like, I've been called in and maybe called out, but love beautifully and graciously.
Right.
And my reaction to that is thank you, gratitude.
Right.
Thank
Right.
you for giving me different language. Here's my commitment to, make that new effort and incorporate that. And it all can be done with grace and the space to
Mm-hmm.
learn. I don't think we learn from shame,
Right.
certainly feeling like we're a bad person or
Condescending.
I'm bad because I look this
Yeah.
Exactly.
way. But
Yes.
what I do expect of leaders, though, is to be working on their allyship, and remember
Mm-hmm.
that you're only an ally when somebody in an affected community calls you an ally. This
Right.
is not work it's not a label you can give yourself. It's a verb. It's earned. It should feel uncomfortable or you're not really doing it right.
I'm
Yeah.
gonna give you some snaps for that.
Right.
Yeah, that's amazing. That's amazing. Listen, and I
Yeah.
love that you mentioned that because when it comes to leadership specifically, that is all the things you just said, that's leadership across the board.
Right.
Like your most successful leaders, despite gender identity or sexuality, they are not going to be successful unless they understand that it, as they say, takes a village, so to speak.
Right.
You're not an island. You need to have people who are supportive of your ideas and vision. You need to also allow people to have a seat at the table and be represented and join you in their perspectives. And you meet them where they live on their own terms, which brings it back to being able to show up as your authentic self. I mean, we hear that a lot.
Mm.
Oprah talks about that a lot. But
Mhm.
as a leader, I consider myself for what I do to be a leader because now my platform is to change perspectives and to have these conversations.
Mhm.
I could not do that for the organization I work for unless they allowed me to show up as my
Mm.
authentic self so that my voice is authentic when I try to maybe change hearts and minds and have
Mm.
dialogue. So it's very, very important. And I love that we have a couple questions coming through already. On the leadership topic, of course, Kirsten on LinkedIn asks, how are each of you as LGBTQ plus leaders personally dealing with the current political climate? And we did talk about that a little bit in the beginning, Giselle, when you mentioned about,
Mhm.
some of the banning thing. But, Jennifer, you also talked about it too. It's very disconcerting for a lot of us who thought we were moving forward. So where would the optimism be found for people who might feel like we're going backwards or the LGBT community might feel like they're actually losing ground that was built for advancement and progress? Where does the optimism come from to stay,
Yeah.
to stay optimistic?
Well, I
Yeah.
mean, yeah, the numbers are growing. We're getting stronger as a community. I mean, the reason all this is happening is because we're so strong, right?
Mm,
I mean,
That part.
right?
yeah.
Every action gets a reaction, and
Mhm.
we have made leaps and bounds of progress. And we just got, Supreme Court decisions within the last couple of years, even that we never thought we'd see. And So I think we were so savvy as a community, I think, in how we moved forward and how we move forward. I've always just been so amazed how we, for example, there's something called the Corporate Equality Index, and it measures companies, and the companies like strive to get 100%, and the HRC keeps changing the bar and raising the bar, and companies keep chasing it because they know they're going to get that scorecard from this community. So, and I know that's just the workplace, and that tends to be more corporate employers.
Right.
But, you know, small businesses, corner stores, you know, we're doing a safe space certification with the Stonewall Community Gives Back Foundation, and it's for the mom and mom, the solo businesses. It sort of goes further than putting a rainbow flag in your window.
Right.
But actually, it has like 8 criteria to sort of like really do the work of earning the trust of the community and saying like, we are a safe space. So I do think there are ways, there are measurements out there by which, and benchmarks that organizations of any size can undertake. And I think that we need, right now more than ever, we've got to be overt and take a stand. If you think that it's implied that we support the community, it's not. It has to be communicated more loudly. And that's the individual, the business, whatever size, and certainly companies then that can actually have the might to go after some of these things and really fight it. Like we're seeing Disney do. Finally, wasn't always you know, perfect, but they have a long time supportive company, like years and years and years ago. I mean, we've been going to LGBTQ conferences there for years. And that support has been really strong.
Sure. I mean, the gay days, the big gay days. I mean, it's so crazy. My friends, they heard about gay Disney and they were like, I want to go. Where is that? They built a gay Disney? I'm like, no, it's the exact same Disney World that you go to, but they shut the park down for gay people. Like, for, you know, after it's like a nightclub and the DJs come and it's amazing. I've seen like Deborah Cox perform there. I mean, you know, and so a lot of my straight friends are like, can I go to gay Disney next year? I'm like, sure. But yeah, I mean, it's about like companies really taking a stand. And I want to just stress too, very much like how social change happens for ethnic people when those ethnic people get voices and seats at the table legislatively. I believe that's very similar, right? I mean, I would say, Giselle, what's your thoughts on, like, you know, if we have more leaders in place politically, then that's where the change could happen too.
Well, yeah, I mean, my answer to this, to Kristen's question on LinkedIn about how, you know, we're each personally dealing with the political climate actually connects exactly to what you're saying. Because, you know, for me, how I'm dealing with that is by really leaning in even more into community and activism, right? I think I'm a pretty involved person when it comes to, you know, activities that are connected to the community, right? So whether it's, you know, really leaning into my work with Outfest or Lamba Legal, I was just, you know, part of their Pride celebration here in LA, or, you know, supporting my friends who are on the board for Human Rights Commission. So, you know, for me, really doubling down on those efforts, right? And putting energy and efforts into the mechanisms that we have in place as a community to fight this political wave that's coming towards us, right? So that's how, you know, for me, and also just the camaraderie and the fellowship and the friendships that are born out of that work, that's what really keeps me lifted and going and motivated as a member of the community, right? So I can't even count just all the beautiful friends that I've made through this community activism and, you know, the efforts that I am a part of. I really consider that a blessing in my life, right? And so I would suggest to anybody who's looking for a way to personally deal with what we read in the news every day and how heavy that is, to maybe try and find an organization or two that you can connect with on a real personal level, where you can build real authentic friendships and you can be a part of moving the needle. Because it's one thing to say that, you know, we need to get more LGBTQ plus people elected at all levels of government, local, state, and federal. But we can all play a part in that in some way, right? Big or small.
Right, like supporting the campaigns or helping them to campaign or
helping the organizers even,
right, yeah.
right? So so for me, that's one way that I help, that I deal with it, I guess, right?
Mhm.
Are we ever really dealing with it? Like,
Right.
it's like,
We're
but
trying.
yeah,
We're
we're
trying,
trying.
yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, and
Yeah,
it's funny because, it's all tied together. Everything that we're saying, there's always like, it's just everything is so interconnected. Like, because that
yeah.
goes back to sort of what Jennifer was saying too, about when she goes into to corporations, it's about sort of educating
Mm.
the people that she's speaking with. And I think that's the pushback, right? The pushback is de- we, we sort of like demystify the
Mhm.
gay thing. Someone
Mhm.
said to me once, "Oh, you're just pushing the gay agenda." And I wrote down my gay agenda and it was like, wake up, brush my teeth, have breakfast,
Yes,
do my
exactly.
work, go to Walmart, come home,
Yes.
water my plants and go to bed. Repeat. And so I was like, I don't know if that's the gay agenda, then there is it. I don't
My
know.
gay
Yeah.
agenda is to get some rest. That's what I'm
Right.
Right?
right.
Yeah, yeah.
Yes.
It's
Yes.
all
True.
these really weird little things people just are so concerned with. But I think it's all interconnected. So I would just again, yes, stress to people, just go out and like try to meet people who
Yes.
are
Yeah.
not
Tori, can
the
I can
same
I
as you.
can I build on
Mhm.
what Giselle said?
Yes, of course.
So the LGBT employee resource groups are what
Mhm.
Giselle, you're talking about, huge communities of support that are
Mm.
Yeah.
people feel so alone and so isolated. And it's never
Oh,
true,
yeah.
usually almost never true, that there's not someone who identifies as you do, in a given workplace or
Mhm.
team or whatever. So I think, like what you say, connecting into the community and taking an active role, feeling that you're bettering something
Mhm.
is a wonderful antidote to all the hostility that's going on, and reminding yourself of how beautiful you are and how vibrant the community is and how strong we are, how much change we've created together. We're
Mhm.
not going away, and also the demographics of feeling this wave from young people. 1 out of every 5 people under the age of 35 is not straight and not cisgender. You
Right.
know,
Yeah. Yeah. I
so
mean, we're there. I mean, the community
yeah, that's
people are
happening.
there. Right.
That's happening. So, and if you're in a workplace where there isn't any sort of DEI efforts, you may stand up and begin to suggest that. You may take a leadership role in that. You might start with, we used to sort of have this catch-all kind of multicultural alliance, when there isn't a critical mass of people to have the ERG for LGBTQ and the Black ERG
Mhm.
and whatever. So there's always a place to start. There's always a council or a committee that you could create to
Mhm.
look at belonging in your workplace, and within that, including the LGBTQ plus identity. But there are wonderful. They're just incubators for talent. Also, there are ways to get seen. There are ways to increase your visibility. There are ways to practice your leadership.
Mm.
Maybe practice some new skills that you don't get to do in your day-to-day role. So, but know that in doing this, you are bettering the place that you are. You are
Mm.
literally bringing the message of, here's what we need to do to pivot and change and mature and meet this moment and also the future, because we have to be competent with this stuff. Like
Mhm.
there's really no human, honestly. With every parent that comes up to me after my talks and says, thank you so much for being here, my kid just came out to me as
Mm.
trans, and I'm swimming, I'm overwhelmed, I'm scared, I don't know how to support. I want to support, usually,
Mhm.
luckily that's what I hear. And
Mhm.
it's so beautiful. I want folks to be prepared. This is coming to you, it's coming to your family, it's coming to your teams, it's all around you. And those folks who just haven't really woken up to it, I
Mm.
invite them to begin to really prepare, because the change is here. Um, and so it's
Mhm.
sort of get on the bus, like, get
Right, right.
get involved, learn, share your pronouns, even though it's uncomfortable. I mean, my pronouns are she, her, and I often say, as a cisgender woman, first of all, I have to pause and say what that means, which I always do.
Right, yeah, would you
Right?
explain that? Because that
Yeah.
term, for
Mhm.
people, it's confusing, and it's an actual scientific term, the term
It's
cisgender.
same, right? So it's a
Yes.
matching up of the sense of your gender matching with the gender of the body that you were born in.
Mhm. The
Like,
psychological and the physical are
yeah, right.
aligned.
There's a
Right.
match there.
Mhm.
And so often when I'm educating leaders, I'll say I am in the community, I'm in the LGBTQ plus community with a same gender partner for 25
Mhm.
years, but I'm
Right.
also a cisgender person, which
Mhm.
means that I walk through the world, and by the way, I'm hetero passing too, and that by then their eyes are sort of bulging.
Right.
They're
Yeah.
not really
Exactly.
very overwhelmed. But then I say, this is so I have to come out all the time. And right. Yes, I know, Giselle, we know this. And then, but I also say, look, I'm also cisgender, which means that the presumption about my gender identity is usually correct because I present as female. But I don't want us as leaders to assume that we know how people identify around us.
Right.
So back to our earlier conversation, how do we open the door so that people will trust us enough to say, by the way, thank you for saying that. Thank you for sharing your pronouns. Like, I trust you a little more. Here's the truth about me. And so what I try to work with leaders is, how do I normalize that what feels very awkward and uncomfortable and unfamiliar way to kind of open that door so that more folks will say, here's where I'm not feeling a sense of belonging because I'm denying who I am, or I'm maintaining this image that's not who I am, like my truth. And so, but people get really stuck in how do I build enough psychological safety so people will tell me that about themselves? And it's a great question because it's a leadership question. It's a human question. How do I, tell my kid, you can confide in me and you can trust me and I'm going to be your ally, even though I don't know what I'm doing.
Right. Yeah.
I'm here for you. Right.
Yeah, especially the parents, because very often kids in those homes don't have the support. And thank goodness there's organizations like the Ali Forney Center, which is a place that, houses a lot of young people who are rejected by their families and they don't have a place to live and they're on the streets. And so that's an important one. And that's actually interesting because now I know neither of you are an expert to answer this question, but we did get another one from LaShawn on YouTube. And so what I just said about the kids being homeless and thrown out of the house is tied to this question, which is advice for teachers who are part of the LGBTQ plus community in their workplace. And I'll just lead this off by saying, with the current climate we're in, that is a tricky pickle because there's legislation being passed now in which, you're almost being forced to not share that part of your life, which means the photo of you and your husband or wife, if you're a man or a woman, who's same sex, that have to come down. You can't talk about the weekend you had with your husband, with your classroom when you went hiking, because you can't mention you have a husband. So I don't really know, but I would tell teachers that, I think that's going to depend on where they work. And
exactly.
I don't even know how to answer that, but I want to try to have that conversation, right? What teachers do in the current climate?
Well, Corey, I was going to say the same thing. I think it really depends where you live, right? And I think the answer to that might look very different if you live in Alabama or if you live in California.
Right.
But I'll even say we're actually having protests here in Glendale, suburb of LA. There's been protests at the school board there in the last LGBT. It's made national headlines, right? So I think it really depends on the community that you live in and taking the temperature appropriately, because first and foremost, your physical safety and your livelihood has to come first. And so, I think people really have to take stock of, where they live and how volatile the climate is there. That's first and foremost. Folks are literally under attack. And so I think that has to be a priority. But then beyond that, I think that, this is probably where Jennifer comes in. I would think that that's where school systems and the leadership of school systems, and we also have to remember that within school systems are elected officials, right? There are school boards that are elected. And so that's where we have to keep people accountable for the workplace that they're providing for their teachers.
Right. Yeah, absolutely.
So there's layers to this in terms of who's accountable for fostering that environment for the teacher. So it doesn't fall on the teacher themselves, but the school system in which they work in, and also those school board trustees that are voted in by the public to protect the interests of not only the teachers, but the children as well.
Mhm. And that goes with, I think, the same thing with all the book banning proposals and stuff. I mean,
Absolutely.
at
Yeah.
some point, for other people who are looking to burn books about, I don't want my kid learning that, I think there has to be a counter of the parents who say, well, that's not your choice of what my kid
Mm,
Mhm.
reads. So we both can have that opinion, but you can't legislate for my child not to have access. I think that's the difference, right? No one's like legislating the other
Mhm.
direction. Is like trying to limit access and limit what teachers can do. And I want to just stress that very often with young people, again, sometimes it's a teacher when they can't have
Absolutely.
support at home that saves them, literally saves their lives, because it's someone to talk to about their sexuality. And there's
Yeah.
legislation being proposed now that would make that a felony for a teacher to have that conversation. So I want people to understand,
What's at stake?
the severity. Yes, what's at stake here. And another question from YouTube we have. Julia asks, "What do I say to the?" This is, I love this one. I don't know how to answer it, but it's a great
yeah.
question. What do I say to those who think my identity is a choice? That is a loaded question. Jennifer, I will. I'm not sure if that's too loaded for you to take on, but
Right,
give me
Corey?
your opinion. Give me your opinion
Oh,
on that whole idea about it being a choice. What do you say to that?
that's so tough. I don't know. I don't like to repeat the trope of if it were a choice, it would be a hard choice. It would be
Yeah,
a tough path to choose.
right. Like, who would do that if it were a choice? Why
Yeah,
would you choose that sort
yeah.
of? Yeah,
But I
yeah.
don't like that argument because I feel so fortunate to be who I am. Like I don't want to
Mhm.
throw us under the bus like that.
Just to
Like,
answer this question, I know.
right? Like
I
I
hear
don't
you.
want to. I don't. I actually credit being LGBTQ with everything I've learned about what makes me unique, and it has forged a strength in me and a
Mm,
clarity and an independence and an autonomy and a
yeah.
community, Giselle, to your point, that I just never imagined. And I feel so fortunate to have found the work I do, to find the people to inspire me every day, to find my voice. Because, by the
Mhm.
way, as a cisgender white female, I was raised in a place where I feel it was very constraining in terms of what I was told I could be.
Mm,
And coming out was the liberation from that.
Hmm.
My culture, I find very patriarchal.
mhm. I
And,
mean, a little bit.
yeah, yeah, I know. Yeah. So when you're in my culture, my ethnic culture, it felt like an emancipation for
Mm,
me to kind of step outside of the
Hmm.
script and say, I am going to determine my life, and no one will have a voice, something to say about it. And
mm,
coming out was a big part of that for me. And so anyway, I think I just want to say, like, it's a blessing. It's a beautiful blessing to be who we are. It makes us unique leaders. It makes us so deeply empathetic. It enables us to cross difference beautifully because we know what the outside feels like. And maybe we're insiders, like I'm an insider in some ways, an outsider in others. And I'm
Mhm.
always kind of acutely aware of which system I'm in, and am I the ally right in this moment, and is
mm.
that what I need to do and use my voice, and am I the one who
Right.
needs the allyship? And it's incredible to see the world through this lens and feel called
Mhm.
by this incredibly brave community to like shine that light for the
Yeah.
future, and also, by the way, to make it brighter for others that follow in our footsteps.
Mhm.
So
Right, right.
so I think so I wouldn't use the argument of who would choose it. But and then I guess my boring answer is, I mean, but still factual. It's how many of us are in the community and how many more are being sort of identified. I won't say discovered. We've always been there, but workplaces really have a hard time counting their LGBTQ plus employees, just like they have a hard time counting a lot of other identities,
Right.
disability being one. The
Mhm.
stigma, right? We call it self ID, and it's this whole kind of like industry of understanding, like, how do we get people to tell us who they are so we can advocate for
Right.
them
Sure,
when
sure.
there's so much fear. So
Yeah, they're feared, right. They're
yeah,
afraid in many cases. So we have to make an environment for them where people feel
yes,
safe to
we
come
do.
out and be who they are.
So
And,
yeah, so just use the numbers to back your case up, I guess, is maybe an answer I would give.
yes, Julia, hopefully we answered that question. And I will add that you really don't owe anyone an answer, Julia.
Oh, I like that.
That's the most important thing. What you owe them is as we talked about earlier, some grace. Allow them to disagree with it, but you don't owe them an answer. And the choice, though, is for you to actually decide to live your life authentically and not worry about what other people say about it. And that's there's a follow-up question which is very similar. And Giselle,
Can we add something?
Oh, sure, yes, please.
But I would also, Jessica, maybe challenge their thinking, because there are a lot of identities and attributes that we're all born with that we don't get to choose. And so why would your, sexual or gender identity be any different, right? So I don't know what race or identity Jessica is. But, for example, like I didn't get to choose to be born Black, right? I didn't get to choose to, whether or not I had eyesight or I could hear, or I didn't get to choose whether, who my parents with, where I was born. And all of those things impact who you become.
Right.
So, so maybe challenge, why would your identity within the LGBTQ community be any different than any one of those other variables that you did not get to choose about when you were born?
Right. I love that. Yeah, we didn't get to pick any of it because I would have been totally much taller.
Yeah, no, I mean, that's the thing. It's, if people select things like this, but it's like, there's about who we are as holistic people. There's very little of it we actually got to choose.
Yeah. No, it's so true. It's so true. I mean, none of it. Quite honestly.
Exactly.
I mean, we can choose how to look now, but it's fixed what we're working with. We didn't have any choice. Yeah,
exactly. So you can challenge their thinking a little bit.
I love that. And that was actually, I'm sorry, we said Jessica, but that was Julia's question. So yes, thank you, Giselle, for that. Yes, but great answer. And I'll just say that it's very close to another question too that someone said, which is how do you navigate when you are not sort of like traditional, or you might be, for example, you may be a bisexual person in a traditional marriage, and you may have a child. And again, what I'll just think you ladies might agree with me on this, it's really nobody's business to justify your relationship. Relationships are for the people who are in them to define them, not the public, not the people at church, not the people on the street looking at you. So I would just really answer that by saying you really don't owe those people an explanation. Tell them to mind their business. That's pretty much how I would answer that question. I do want to move on. I do want to move on though to more actionable advice which is a great kind of, as we get to the closing of our conversation. Jessica from YouTube is asking, what can allies do to support the LGBTQ community, especially with all the hatred going on right now in the world? Now, we did tap into some earlier. Jessica may have missed it, but there's things that Giselle, you mentioned. So maybe recap a couple of those things, actionable advice that they can do. And Jennifer as well, maybe fill in a couple gaps there too, of whatever Giselle has not mentioned when she has completed her thought.
What can allies do? I mean, first of all, listen and listen, read, and learn. Right? Are probably like the baseline level things that you can do. Right. So I think it depends, everybody's kind of coming in at a different point of the conversation and of the movement here. But I think, listen to your queer friends and family members and learn about their experiences, right? They will probably really illuminate you to things that you didn't even think of, right? Just experiences that they have. So I think that would be the first step, because the more you learn, you'll be able to take that information and share it with other people. And so that's how we move the culture forward, right? Is when somebody learns something and then they pass it on to somebody else. So that's just baseline. But then also, right, just again, finding organizations in your local community that you feel you align with, and maybe you want to get involved with and support in whatever way you can, right? So whether that's volunteering, or if you are in a position to support their work financially, to do that. There's so many ways to be an ally, and it's really beyond, posting a rainbow on your Instagram or Facebook account. We need you in October, November, December, January, February, March, April, May as well. So So yeah, so that's the other thing too, is to take it beyond the month of June. That would be a great first step in allyship, actually, is to,
I
find
love
a
that.
way to engage the community in a different part of the year that's not connected to Pride Month. So
I think that's a tagline, Giselle. Take it beyond the month of June. I think you better trademark that before I do. Before I run to the trademark office and grab it. I'm just going to tell you, I'll snatch it. So you better do it.
Yeah.
I really will. I love it.
Thank
you.
Yeah, but yeah, exactly. So I mean, I think there's just a lot of really just like baseline ways, right? I think, and I really just want to say too, like I think when people think about ways to be allies, like we're thinking like so big picture, right?
Right, grandiose. You don't have to.
Exactly.
Right.
It doesn't have to be like so big picture. It can be really small, simple ways. And so I think those are just a few ways that people can show up as allies.
And Jennifer, anything to add to that, or did she?
So good. No, so good. I mean, she nailed it. Yes. Listen, learn, all those things. Be a fly on the wall. Diversify your network. Too. Like, there's only so much learning we can do from reading and listening and podcasts, which I really recommend. But look at the people you spend time with. Look at how all the diversity within your network, and this just goes not just for LGBTQ, but in all ways. Proactively seeking people out to be in relationship with them, and then saying, what does allyship look and sound like to you? I think letting people determine what it looks like, you'll find there isn't one answer.
Right.
Some people need that solidarity to look a certain way. And so I think like as we're learning how to fit ourselves as and help the situation and support, sometimes we can be the savior ally, like somebody who sort of makes assumptions about what the solution is and what's needed. And if you're really skilled and experienced, you might be right. You might know. But I think while you're learning, I would check in and calibrate a whole lot to say, what does it look like for you? What would support look like? What could I do? Now, but again, having said that, you don't want to also be so dependent on everybody else to educate you.
Right. So, do some research, right? Read some books and
like be prepared. Have your baseline ready to say, I know this happens. I know these microaggressions. I'm looking out for this when I hear this. I'm going to, make room, for example, for people to self-identify to me so that I don't misgender them, or I don't make assumptions about like this question about being married and in a heterosexual appearing relationship of being bi. Like, that's a great reminder. Thank you for whoever asked that question, because you can look out at a bunch of people and every day I say to myself, I have no idea how these people identify. I don't know.
Yeah.
And we got to just keep opening the door and not making assumptions. And also, by the way, disclosing our truth too. I mean, this isn't just about others. This is, like becoming uncomfortable in that weird way of disclosure, practicing the disclosure in ourselves, whether it's mental health issues, whether it's having a neurodiverse kiddo, whether I'm in a, mixed race marriage, whether I'm a single parent, how I grew up. I think participating in the vulnerability that so many people feel, not literally, but making ourselves vulnerable, sharing our story, I think also is a way that instead of sort of sitting comfortably on the sidelines and saying, well, this is other people's issue, I would really like to see more allies practicing sort of bringing their own story to the fore that is not visible. It's a part of that invisible diversity to mention, and say, here's something you may not know about me. I'm taking a risk, and it's important for me to take those risks that I'm asking others to take. And I would love to see more relationships like that, because I think that's how we grow together.
Yeah, no, I agree. And I think it's always about, for me, sort of having that dialogue in which we can then understand how other people live, how they navigate life. And very often we will find these common denominators that are like, my mom did that when I was growing up. So how did I turn out gay? You didn't. Clearly that's not a thing, because so, but those conversations, when they happen, there's an aha moment of people might go, yeah, that's, he's no different than me. So,
I asked Jennifer a follow-up?
Sure.
Something, I'm actually wondering, could you unpack a little bit more when you were talking about how one way people can be allies is to seek out, relationships with folks outside of their normal wheelhouse, right? And I'm curious how you would advise folks to do that authentically, because it's funny. I feel like I've been on the other end of that many times in my life, where I feel like somebody, wants to add me to their,
Roster.
their roster of Black friends, or
Yeah.
their roster of, queer Black friends, or whatever the case may be. And I'm like, this is going to be a lot of labor for me, right? And so what you were saying, in terms of like explaining things to them and, all this kind of stuff. So how should, because I think that's a great point. People want to form these types of relationships outside of, the pockets that we exist in, but how do you do that authentically, right?
Yeah, without making someone feel tokenized. Right. And I don't know, it's such a subtle thing. And it's I've been so involved with so many different communities and invited into those. And so I think I was thinking more being a fly on the wall, and doing a whole lot of listening, and then the offer to be helpful, but not necessarily like singling out maybe that one-on-one relationship, but maybe sort of spreading it a little wider, so we don't overburden one person. We don't make somebody feel they're being kind of serving as the educator of us, but that they see our commitment that's bigger than that relationship with us, that where they show up over and over and over again. Like, I think that it's our other behaviors, it's the other things we do, it's where we maybe, if we have the means to give philanthropically, or where we sort of, allyship is continuous, and it's earned, and it's like many touch points. So I do think by the time you lean on, you call in that friend, that friend isn't wondering, am I their only person? Because I can see all this other stuff that they've demonstrated. So so before you ask that person to be in relationship with you and educate you, I think we've got to do a lot of these other things. Like, we have to like earn our stripes in this, and sort of have that solid foundation to stand on, and give back institutionally, give back personally, be involved, make time, show up not just once, but over and over, so that you begin to be trusted by a community, that you're not kind of this tourist in their world.
Right. Or trying to like check a box off just so you can say, well, I supported Pride this month, so, give me a gold star. Right. It's the intent. It's actually the intention, and it's actually it's putting in the work. I mean, that's pretty much putting in the work. That's what it boils down to. And these are some wonderful, wonderful responses. And I'm so happy again that I had you both here to talk about them. And we're moving towards the end of our conversation here. And what I'd like to do now is just, again, thank you for the inspiring words from our two remarkable guests, Jennifer Brown and Giselle Phelps. And we appreciate you being here tonight. And for everyone watching, you can scan the QR code you see on your screen right now to learn more about Jennifer Brown's book. It's How to Be an Inclusive Leader, Your Role in Creating Cultures of Belonging Where Everyone Can Thrive. So while they're checking that out, Jennifer, what was your inspiration for writing this book?
Oh, thank you. It's my fourth book, second edition of that one that you just mentioned.
Congrats.
Thank you. And the first was 2019, so I had to rewrite it.
Nice. Yeah, because right.
A lot's happened.
And I could be so much more direct. So I think it's more hard hitting. There's more stuff on equity in it, because as the language and conversation changed, it became more direct. Thank goodness. Like, I was so tired of not being able to say words like even white and black. I mean, I think I couldn't even refer to myself as a white person and what that means. And anyway, so it was so cathartic, and really I'm very proud of it. And it's an invitation to any learner at any stage to like enter the conversation and the work, and without judgment, wherever they're coming from, and however they identify, and to kind of jump in and feel good, like it's an investment in yourself to be inclusive. This isn't just something that somebody requires you to do. It's the invitation to transform. It's transformed me. It has. I meet wonderful people like you. I get to spend my time with people who I learn from and are kind, and who want a kinder world. And I would think any human would want that, but all the intimidation and fear and hesitation and self-consciousness has really gotten in the way. So the book is
Yeah.
meant to kind of cut through that and say, hey, like I'm learning too. This is something I figured out a little bit. I'm still learning. Come join me, and be very, very encouraging, because I think we got to lead with that. There's a lot of not that in the
Yeah, yeah.
discourse. And unfortunately, I think we're losing kind of generations of potential allies too.
Yeah,
I'm
right.
worried about how people are responding. I'm concerned because we're never going to get where we need to go if we don't go together.
Right, right. Well, I
Right.
love that. And it's also, I would say that's aligned so much with what we do with the NSLS, because
Mm,
we build leaders who make a better world. I mean, that's
mm,
literally our motto, and that's what we
beautiful.
do. And these kinds of conversations like that really, really are part of that. So your book is really aligned with that mission. And so actually, so Giselle, for you, for everyone to learn more about what she does with her awesome public relations and media talent firm, Grand Rising Talent, there is a QR code now on your screen as well you can check out. And Giselle, what's going on over there? You got a lot of great stuff happen at your company. So what's happening? What's hot and new you want to talk about?
Yeah, I mean, we have the pleasure and honor of representing a lot of amazing TV talents. We have an amazing roster of clients, and we really focus on representing Black, Brown, and LGBTQ plus hosts.
Hmm.
And so, one of our clients who has just an amazing podcast that you all should check out is Dr. John Paul Higgins, who hosts Black Fat Femme podcast, which was featured this month on Apple's podcast. It's an iHeart podcast, and it tackles all those interesting intersections of identity, right? So I would definitely check that out. And they've been getting a lot of buzz this month, and so that's something to check out. But all our clients stay very busy, so you can go to Grand Rising Talent and check us out. For sure.
That's wonderful. I know I want to just mention too that you do represent Erica Cobb, who we love. We've had her on.
Yes.
I had her on Motivational Monday. She was our Black History Month speaker with Dr. Corey Yeager. So we love Erica. So thank you for being a part of bringing her to us as well.
And Erica is a fantastic ally. Erica is a fantastic ally. She's a great example of somebody who uses her platform on a daily basis to discuss these issues and to share her perspective as an ally. So
excellent.
We love her for it. Yeah.
We do indeed. So thank you. Excellent. I appreciate you both sharing a little bit about what you're doing to make the world a better place with your own brands and your own products and your company. And we just really are happy that you could do that with us tonight. And so I want to just say to everybody else, happy Pride Month, of course. And remember, as we've discussed already, the LGBTQ plus community appreciates support from our allies, not just in June, but all year round, as Giselle so fabulously stated earlier. And as I say at the end of each of our live streams, we all can make change happen through truth, knowledge, and taking action. So remember, knowing and understanding the world around us prepares us to be more empathetic and successful leaders. So thanks for watching, everyone. Have a good night.